Okay. I would like to start by saying tonight's shuir is Elul Nishmat Avi Mori Dov Ber Meir Ben Reuven Halevi Imi Marati Rachel Bat Harav Michael. And this week's parsha is the parsha of Shoftim. And one of the topics that we come across in the parsha of Shoftim is the parsha of the accidental murderer and the cities of refuge. And I wanted to look through the different sources in Torah where this concept appears, that there is a significant difference between premeditated murder and accidental murder, and that there are different degrees, as the Talmud tells us, of accidental murder, and how the Torah deals with these different layers. And we're going to start, of course, with looking at the different sources. So if we look through the Torah, we find that this whole concept of accidental murder appears in 4 different places. However, you'll note from the width of the columns on the 4 different settings that we have that they're significantly different in their length and in their content. So if we look, the first time we have the concept of the accidental murder is in Parshat Shmot, Sefer Shmot, Parshat Mishpatim, where we have 2 short psukim, which really obviously does not talk about the accidental murder. It talks about the premeditated or the willful murder who slays somebody and causes him to die. He is surely put to death. And in Pasuk Gid Gimel it says, that somebody who lo tzada did not hunt after this person, and God caused him to come into his hand. I will place for you a makoma sheyanu shama. You will have place for you to there to run. That's the entire 2 verses. There's a 3rd verse that immediately follows it, which talks about the premeditated, willful murder of a person who literally hunts after his fellow to kill him secretly, or harshly. Even from the mizbech, he may be taken to put to death. So we see the harshness of the penalty in the case of the premeditated murder, the seemingly very different level of penalty in the case of the accidental murder. We then go to Sefer Bamidbar, the end of Parshat Maseh, which has a very, very long, as you look through the 2nd column, you'll see it's a rather long exposition on this whole concept of Mit and Ari Miklat. Then the 3rd mention of Ari Miklat, which I'm going to again go to, is in Parshat V'Chanan, where it's more almost as a passing topic. It really is not a halachic content. It just is to tell us that that Moshe began the process of the Arei Miklat, of setting aside these cities of refuge. He begins this at this time in his conversation with Bnei Yisrael. After 40 years, he's describing the events of the 40th year, and he says at that point in time, he set aside 3 cities already. And these cities were specifically set aside, as we see in Dvarim Perek Dal, Pasuk Membet, Lanus Shama Rotzeach, Asher Yortzach et Reyehu Vidat, Ulo Sonalo Mitmol Shulshom, V'nos Elo Achat Min Horim Hoel V'choy. And that's really all it says in that parsha, is this one pasuk, or actually 2 pasuk. One that tells Moshe set 3 of these cities aside, and it tells us the purpose of the city. And then, of course, we have our parsha of this week's parsha, which gives us again a great detail on the Arei Miklat. So the 2 chapters that we're primarily comparing are the parsha Maseh and the parsha of Shoftim. And the question is, why are they structured the way they are, and trying to give us a little bit of understanding what is the specific message that Moshe is trying to convey to the generation that is about to enter Eretz Yisrael through the discussion in Parsha Shoftim, which, as I said, like all of the Parashot in Sefer Dvarim, being that they form a Moshe's final farewell address to the nation, there is obviously a specific messages that he is trying to teach the generation that's about to enter Eretz Yisrael. So we'll begin by looking at the comparison of the beginning to the comparison of Matos. Both of them begin with the concept that you're going to enter Eretz Yisrael. In Maaseh, we read, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Lamor, that here it's Hashem commanding Moshe, command Bnei Yisrael that when they enter Eretz Yisrael or Eretz Canaan, when they cross the Yarden to Eretz Canaan, then they have to do the following. And here is Moshe in Sefer Dvarim reminding Bnei Yisrael of that mitzvah. Excuse me. So he begins again, when Hashem will cause these nations, when he will cut them off, and you will inherit their land. So again, each of them begin with Bnei Yisrael entering Eretz Yisrael. One, as I said, is in parshat Maseh, is Hashem's command. Parshat Shoftim is Moshe repeating that or sections of that command to Bnei Yisrael. Okay, again, this seems to be a very, very recurring concept of, firstly, the number, which we already saw by when Moshe set aside 3. He says, Hashem's command to Moshe in Parshat Maseh begins with the concept of 6 cities of refuge. 3 are to be on the west bank. I'm sorry, on the east bank, excuse me. And 3 are to be in Eretz Yisrael proper, i.e. Between the Mediterranean and the Jordan. So we have 6 cities divided into 2 groups of 3. And as we saw, Moshe set aside the 3 that were to be in Aver HaYarden, which we read it, which we already talked about in Parshat Hanan. And again, here in Bamidbar, it repeats this concept of these Sheish Harim Ha'ela. And based on this pasuk, the Sheish Harim Ha'ela Lemiklat, that these 6 cities together will be a miklat, the Gemara derives that even though Moshe set aside the 3 cities already in Aver HaYarden, in the east bank of the Jordan, nonetheless, they did not assume the properties of Ir Miklat until the other 3 had been set aside after the conquest by Bnei Yisrael. And it tells us later on in Sefer Yoshua that Yoshua does set aside the other 3 cities. But again, the fact is that we need all 6 in order for the cities to be operative as Arei Miklat, based on this Sheish Arei Miklat Tihiena Lachem. They must be all 6 cities of refuge, Limiklat, only when they're Tihiena, because again, this concept of Tihiena means they have to be a single unit, which is repeated not only in Pasuk Yud Gimel, but also again in Pasuk Tet Vav in Parshat Maseh. In Moshe's reteaching of this halacha to Bnei Yisrael, he's reminding them, Shalosh Arim Tavdilach, you have to set aside 3 cities. Betoch Artzecha, inside Eretz Yisrael proper. Why? Implied is because he's already set aside the 3 cities in Aver HaYarden. Now you'll notice there's a break between Vav and Zayin because there are other things that the Torah discusses here, which we'll get to further down. But the parsha again reminds us of this concept of there have to be 3 in Eretz Yisrael. And now Hashem tells us, by the way, according to the Gemara, this is now talking about not when Bnei Yisrael enter Eretz Yisrael, but when at the time in the future Bnei Yisrael are able to conquer all of the territories that Hashem promised to the Avot, which is much larger than what we today consider Eretz Yisrael, or even what was conquered by the Olei Mitzrayim in the time of Yehoshua. Then it says, then you will add 3 more. So that according to the Gemara's interpretation of Pasuk Tet, in the future, there will come a time where there will be a total of 9 Arei Miklat, even though the Torah only speaks of 6. It here is adding another. Moshe is reminding them that Latid Lavo, there may be 3 other cities. Okay. Again, so we have the concept firstly of the numbers, and then which something that is totally missing in Bamidbar, where Hashem commands this to Moshe to command Bnei Yisrael. There is a pasuk here in Dvarim, pasuk Gimel, right here, highlighted right here, Tachin Lecha Haderech, which tells us a very important principle of Arei Miklat. Tachin Lecha Haderech, that the way has to be prepared to get to these cities. As a matter of fact, Rashi quotes the Gemara that says that at every crossroads in Eretz Yisrael, every time you came to a crossroad, a fork in the road, one of the direction signs had to point you to the nearest Ir Miklat. That any time you came to a crossing, every road sign had a direction sign to the nearest Ir Miklat. That's Tachin Lacha Haderech. And in order to make these cities reachable, easy to get to, and again, what is the purpose of these cities? But again, the purpose, the way these were set aside was by dividing the land into three, and each third, they were equidistant. There was, according to Rashi, there was an equal distance from the one northern border to the first, from the first to the second, second to the third, and then from the third to the southern border, so that they were equally spaced, so that no matter where you were in Eretz Yisrael, you would have access to an Ir Miklat somewhere in your region. It wasn't like you would have to travel all the way across the whole country to get there. So the purpose of these cities, at least as they're spelled out in Dvarim, is their accessibility. And again, as it's spelled out in all of these parshiot, the whole purpose is lanus shama rotzeach. There are certain types of murderers who are to run there. Although interestingly enough, we have one verse where it says, and we actually have two places where it says lanus shama kol make nefesh, but here it adds bishgaga. But here in Dvarim, it says lanus shama kol rotzeach. That every rotzeach is to run to this city. Anytime somebody takes someone's life, they must run immediately to one of these cities, because if they don't run to one of these cities, we are told that the purpose of it is, we are told in Bamidbar, and I got to find this pasuk. Where is the pasuk? The pasuk, I got to find the pasuk I'm looking for. Okay. No, Pen Yudov, here we are. Pasuk Vav in our parsha. The reason that we have to have these cities, the reason they have to be accessible is Pen Yudov Goel Adam Acharei HaRotzeach. Perhaps the Goel Hadam, who is going to appear, as you see from the purple, prominently toward the end of the parsha. Goel Hadam is the redeemer, the nearest kin of the victim, of the person who has been killed. He will run after the murderer, or after the person who's taken his life, because he will be aroused in his heart. He go and he will be able to overtake him. If it's far away, and that's why they have to be equally spaced, so that they're accessible, so that the murderer can run there before the Goel Hadam can overtake him. But if he is able to overcome nafesh, he will kill him, because he has not reached the city of refuge. So the city of refuge really has two different roles, as we see by comparing Sefer Bamidbar, Sefer Vayikra, and taking the two of these together. It has two roles. One is anybody who murders somebody goes to the Ir Miklat, and it says the first thing that he runs there until he is able to Adam Dolif Hashem Bamishpat. I have to find that pasuk, that he stays there, so that the Goel Hadam. Here we go. This is here back in Bamidbar. These cities should be lemiklat migoel. They are the place of refuge for the murderer from the Goel Hadam. Because we cannot take the murderer's life until he is brought to justice. So we see very important concepts in this parsha. Number one, the concept that the person who has taken someone else's life has a responsibility to try to save his own life if he is able. And the only way we are allowed to punish him is through judicial process, if the murder was willful. If the murder was a willful murder, then the judges are to, if again there are proper witnesses, proper testimony, are to execute him. And if not, they are, as the pasuk tells us, I got to find the next pasuk, which says, let's go here. V'shaftu ha'eda bein hamakei uvein hagoel hadam ala mishpatim ha'ela. We're still in Bamidbar, pasuk Chaf Daled here, where it tells us that we, the Eda, the Bet Din, have an obligation, v'shaftu, to judge between the Goel Hadam, i.e., the family of the person who has been murdered, and the murderer concerning these halachot. Was it, which is the whole section before, was it bichli barzeli kovayamot? Was this a willful murder, as we see in pasuk Tet Zayin, Yud Chet, Chaf, and Chaf Aleph, all of which deal of cases where this was a willful murder, in which case the Goel Adam is allowed to, has permission to kill the Rotseach, or if it was below tzidiyavalo, oyevlo makesh rata, or if it was an accidental murder, in which case the court has to be tzilo haidot harotseach miad goel hadam. In the case where we cannot prove that this was a willful murder, the Bet Din has the obligation to protect the murderer from the goel hadam killing him. Then the Ir Miklat now takes on its secondary role. It now becomes a refuge, a safe place for the murderer, because it was not an intentional murder. And the Yashabah, he has to live in the same Ir Miklat that he ran to, until the death of the Kohen Gadol, at which point he's allowed to return to his normal home. If he leaves the Ir Miklat before the Kohen Gadol dies, the Goel Hadam has permission, before the Kohen Gadol dies, Goel Hadam has permission to kill him and is not held liable for murdering him, for killing him in revenge, in exchange, I guess, for the murder of their kinsman. So the Ir Miklat has, as I said, two distinct roles. One, as I said, to protect the murderer until they get to trial. Two, if it was not a willful murder, if it was an accidental murder, it is to protect the murderer from the Goel Hadam. But it also seems to have a secondary purpose, which is this concept of Mot HaKohen HaGadol, the death of Kohen Gadol, he's allowed to return, seems to imply that there is some type of kapara, some type of atonement involved in living in the Ir Miklat, going into Galut, going away from one's normal home, to atone for the fact that they were the agent through which this person met their death. Even though it was not intentional, the fact that I was the agent, I caused somebody else's death, I require atonement for that. Yes, I require refuge so that the Goel Hadam doesn't kill me, but I also need some type of atonement. And that's why in Bamidbar we read about, there seems to be a, quote, a sentence, a term of sentence, which completely varies based on when you happen to commit your accidental murder. So if you were an accidental murderer who did it a year before the Kohen Gadol died, you only had to serve a year. If you did 10 years before, you'd serve 10, 20, 30, 40. So again, we see from here that clearly this is not a equal to all punishment. And clearly that's because accidental murder is clearly not something that can carry the same penalty for everyone, because there are different degrees of accidental happenings. And I think that's another key lesson of these two parshiot, of the parshiot of Ir Miklat, that we have to understand that even though things are accidental, sometimes they're accidental very, very close to willful, and sometimes they're accidental, totally unavoidable, nothing that was totally beyond our control virtually. And yet the closer we are to being, let's say, perhaps slightly negligent, or we weren't paying close enough attention to what we were doing, is true not just in the case of murder, but it's true in the case of everything we do in life. There are times when we are, quote, just going through the motions and we're really not thinking about what we're doing, and we don't get the result we desired because we didn't put enough energy and effort into what we were doing. And I think that's an important lesson that Moshe wants to teach this generation. that we have to be able to put our best foot forward. We have to be focused on what we want to accomplish, because if we're not focused on what we want to accomplish, it's so easy to get distracted and lose our focus. And then we are just acting without really focusing on what we need to do. So the fact is that we, and Moshe is teaching us through the whole laws of reviewing the laws of the accidental murderer. He is reminding us that we have a responsibility, a personal responsibility to be in control of ourselves so that things don't happen accidentally. And if they do, we have consequences that we're going to have to live with, whether we like it or not. And again, interestingly enough, one of the things that I thought was very interesting about the whole way of these parashiyot go is the different ways the Torah refers to how this accidental murder happened. In one case, it's called, if I'm going to go through them, and they're all highlighted in blue. In one case, it's makeh nefesh bishgaga. He killed somebody bishgaga. Shgaga means an accident. In another place, it says bivli da'at. In this, by the way, nefesh bishgaga is in parshat Matot. When Moshe sets the cities aside, it says asher tzachat re'eh. It doesn't say bishgaga. It says bivli da'at, without previous knowledge. In other words, he was not intending to kill him. And there's a second criteria, is that this isn't somebody he hated. Because if it's somebody you hated, even if it seems to be bivli da'at, it doesn't necessarily mean it was without knowledge. Because if it's somebody you really had it in for, there's a very high likelihood that your accident may not have been an accident. Similarly, those same two phrases appear in our parasha, bivli da'at, here in pasuk dal, bivli da'at v'lo sonelo. Again, no knowledge, that didn't hate him. Interestingly enough, though, when the concept is first introduced in Parashat Mishpatim in Sefer Shmot, it says Vasher lo tzada. He didn't hunt him down. So again, clearly differentiating between premeditated, willful murder, something that's bivli da'at, without intention, and he is not his enemy. He didn't have any reason that he wanted to kill him. The other thing, again, here we also have the same concept of below tzediyah, without hunting him down. And again, the concept of below oyev lo v'lo mvakesh ra'ato. He didn't hate him. He wasn't looking to harm this other person who was accidentally killed. So all of those different ways the Torah describes the relationship between the accidental murderer and the victim is to tell us that we the court, as well as we the society, have to always beware when something looks like an accidental murder and make sure that it really was not a premeditated murder. And that's really the whole concept that we spoke about here of the shaftu ha'edah bein hamakeh bein goel hadam. They have a very may be very challenging job to sift through the evidence to determine, was this really an accident or was this premeditated, rigged up to look like it was an accident? So we have to understand that is, again, the function of justice and the importance of the judges and the law enforcement really understanding what's going on and thoroughly investigating situations. I think the bottom line, again, of course, the concept of the Goel Hadam, is the redeemer of the blood, being the nearest relative who is looking for the murderer to make sure that justice is done. He is making sure that if this really was an accidental murder, okay, but if it's really a willful murder, we want to make sure that the murderer doesn't go unpunished. And the other interesting thing is, you'll notice I've highlighted in green, is this concept of the purpose of these cities, as Moshe tells when he sets aside, says, the purpose is originally, as I said, it's twofold. One is to get to that city so the Goel Adam can't kill you and to be there before the trial. The second is, if you really were non-premeditated, were non-willful murder, then you run to these cities again, v'chai, and that concept again appears in our parsha again, because originally in Pasuk Gimel it says every murderer runs there, but not every murderer who runs there is allowed to live there and stay there. And that's this whole concept of achai. When it is accidental, he can get there and be allowed to live there. The final thing I wanted to close this whole discussion of this with is the Torah, and Moshe Rabbeinu here clearly wants us to understand the sanctity of human life, the value of every human being. And of course, we know that Kadosh Baruch Hu creates Adam as a singular human being so that we will all understand the importance of every human life. Human life is precious. We have to be very, very careful that we do not go about doing things in such a way that we can possibly cause somebody to lose their life by our negligence or inattention to what we are doing. And the Torah really emphasizes this in the closing psukim of each of the sections of Bamidbar and Dvarim, with this concept, lo tachnif v'aretz asher atem ba ki hadam hu yachnif et haaretz. We should not violate the land where we are, because the blood will cause the land to become violated. V'la'aretz lo yichupar. We will not be able to achieve atonement for the land, la dama asher shupach bo, for blood that is wantonly spilled in it, ki im b'dam shofcho, except by punishing those who are wantonly spilling blood. Similarly, we have the same concept at the end of the parsha this week. The end of the discussion of Ari Miklat also in Dvarim ends with lo yishafech dam naki bekerv artzcha asher Hashem lokecha noten lecha nachala v'yaya lecha damim. Again, if we allow innocent blood to be spilled in the midst of the land, then it will be v'yaya lecha damim. The blood will be upon you. So we, the society, and certainly we, who are those of the society who are involved in law enforcement and justice, have a very, very high responsibility to maintain the dignity, the sanctity of human life, to understand that, because if not, we become accomplices in the prevalence of willful and unwillful and murder, and that trickles down to other aspects of human life, because we no longer care about others. We no longer value human life. And we have to be very, very careful that as we begin the month of Elul, this parsha is always read at the beginning of the month of Elul, that we understand the sanctity of life. We understand the role, the justice, that we must support systems of justice wherever we are living. And finally, that we are responsible for actions even when they seem to be accidental, because everything that we do, we need to be in control of. We need to be watching what we're doing to try to avoid those things from happening and keeping those things from happening. And we hope and pray that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should protect us from being the cause of accidents, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bless us with a year of health, a year of prosperity, a year of peace, and a year that we will be zochet kula shleim b'meira of Yameinu. Amen. Thank you.